welcome to everyone. My name is Chris Denby. I am the founder and CEO of the Advisory Board for the Arts, and I couldn't be more thrilled that you are joining us today for this incredible conversation we're about to have. I want to begin simply with a little bit of background as to what we are doing here today and what we're going to be going through. I'm joined by several of my colleagues in this conversation. Bray Blackley, Managing Director for Dance and Ballet for the Advisory Board for the Arts, to whom I will turn the podium over in just a moment. Pilar Cardenas, our Senior Director in Europe, who works with our members with us in Europe and who was involved in the planning and organization of this particular conversation. But most important of all, welcome to all of you. We have an amazing group joining us today from well over a dozen countries, 80 different arts organizations of different types. Yes, of course, a lot of dance and ballet companies, but also museums and symphony orchestras and lots of other art forms. We are delighted that you could be here with us. And thank you for taking this time, particularly as we get closer and closer to the holidays, to come and be part of this wonderful conversation. For those of you who are perhaps a little bit less familiar with the Advisory Board for the Arts, just a little bit of background. We are a research organization that is now a little bit over a year and a half old. We work with member organizations and do research on their behalf on a wide variety of issues. And we are blessed to have members in 14 countries all over the world in all different art forms, extraordinary organizations. As you can see, many of our members are on this webinar today. And so I welcome you and thank you for joining us as well. The topic sets that we tend to cover are really quite varied, and particularly in this extraordinarily difficult year that we are all in, our focus has been on everything we can possibly do to support our member arts organizations on the range of issues that you see here today on this slide. That being said, back in March, we did want to try to contribute as much as possible and as broadly as possible to the world of the arts. And one of the things that we did was to initiate a public, free webinar series. All of our webinars are available for free to all of you and anybody else on our website. And we'll put in the chat here a link to where you can come and see the 21 other webinars that we did. All of them were with the idea in mind of helping arts organizations as much as we can on issues having to do with the pandemic. So as you can see here, this archive of topics that we covered with extraordinary guests from all around the world. We covered topics from fundraising to marketing issues, to reopening strategies, to leadership issues pertaining to how one works with teams in this extraordinarily difficult time. And so today we complete that cycle of now 22 webinars that we've conducted with a topic that is fairly different and perhaps somewhat unique in the universe of ones that we have covered across this year. We're talking about artistic innovation, and specifically through the lens of one particular case study. A case study of a collaboration, an extraordinary collaboration, which in our minds exemplify some of the things that arts organizations can be doing right now to help themselves pull out of this horrible pandemic and this horrible period for the world of the arts. The inspiration that this collaboration, I think, can bring to all of us in terms of where the art can really help us think differently, bring us to a new chapter, propel us in a new direction, is in fact extraordinary in our opinion, and why we wanted to bring this story to as broad an arts audience as possible. So what we are doing here is that we want to profile the evolution of this collaboration to give you a sense for how you might even think about things of this nature and how you overcome some of the obstacles to collaboration in this particular environment and moment in time. We believe that one of the keys to arts organizations helping themselves recover fully from the pandemic is a focus on innovation, is a focus on thinking differently, and collaborations, particularly artistic collaborations, in our minds lie at the center of all of that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Bray Blackley, to begin this exploration of this extraordinary story, right?
Thank you, Chris. And so we have our guests here today, Tamar Rojo and Farouk Chaudhry. Thank you both so much for joining us. We're really thrilled to be able to hear from both of you. Just a quick introduction about these two remarkable individuals. Tamar Rojo is the lead principal and artistic director of English National Ballet. She trained as a ballet student in Madrid and then was invited to join the Scottish Ballet, where after a year, she was invited by Derek Dean, then artistic director of ENB, to join that company. And then in 2000, Tamara was invited to be a principal dancer at the Royal Ballet, where she danced for many years until she was invited to become the artistic director of ENB. Tamara, as you all probably know, is one of the most celebrated dancers in the world, has won a host of awards in her career, and we are very honored to have her with us here today. Our other guest is Farouk Chaudhry, executive producer of Akram Khan Company, in addition to many other roles. After retiring from dancing in 1999, Farouk completed his MA in Arts Management from City University. A year later, he teamed up with the choreographer Akram Khan to co-found the Akram Khan Company, which just celebrated its 20th anniversary. From 2013 to 2017, Farouk was named the creative producer for English National Ballet to work with Tamara, and that partnership is what we're here to talk about today. Farouk has many other accomplishments and projects and entrepreneurial activities in his resume that I don't have time to talk about today, but we're really thrilled to have such an artistic entrepreneur here to talk with us today. So welcome, Farouk and Tamara.
Thank you.
I'm going to say now, and probably will repeat it again, but we're very happy to have questions come from you all for Tamara and Farouk during the webinar. If you can put them in the chat, we'll try to get to them as we can. So please feel free to put your questions there in the chat. I believe here, so today we're talking about, like Chris said, one specific collaboration between Akram Khan and Farouk and the English National Ballet. We're talking about Akram Khan's Giselle. For those of you in the ballet world, I'm sure you've heard a lot about this production. It's actually only been performed in the United States one time in Chicago to a sold-out crowd, but it's been performed all around the world, has had a cinema release, and is available now on Marquee TV, where I watched it and cried, and is also available now, I believe, on the English National Ballet website on their Ballet on Demand platform. So if you haven't seen it, I definitely encourage you to do so. You won't regret it. But here we're going to show you just a quick trailer for those of you who have not been able to see it yet. Even just the trailer makes my heart race a little bit, I have to say. not your grandmother's Giselle, as we've been saying on our team. And I mean, the score and the costumes, the lighting and the dancing, everything is just so beautiful. And, that's what we're going to talk about today. We want to hear how you all made this happen. So here's a quick timeline of the production. And I think the key things I want to point out, there's really so many accolades and awards and impressive statistics about this production. Premiered in 2016, and I believe it was a co-production with a few other organizations. I'm sure you'll talk more about that. It received a cinema release and the first English National Ballet production to do so, and has been widely viewed. It brought English National Ballet to many countries where he hadn't performed in quite some time, and the story is still going on. I believe you were supposed to tour this show to a few cities last year, and of course that's been pushed off, but you have plans to continue performing it in 2021.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And this is the last piece of introduction that I'll give, and then I'll turn it over to you all. But this quote here from you, Tamara, I believe when you received an award, is really amazing. And since its premiere, over 300,000 people have seen this production. And, I actually did search around and just sort of asked a few friends if they know of any new production that has been so widely viewed, and no one could think of one. So really impressive, and so many amazing critical reviews and quotes from different newspapers. The one I want to point out is from The Guardian. The whole ballet is magnificently danced and is, I think, a gift for ENB. And I think that's a good theme for us to kick off your conversation, telling us a little bit about why this was a gift for ENB and how we may be able to teach some lessons to our colleagues about how they might also create a similar successful partnership. So my first question for you all is, if you can just tell us a little bit about your partnership and how you got to know each other, how you work together, and why this partnership was perhaps unique for the world of the arts.
Should I start, Farouk? Yeah. Okay. I guess it was a long time coming, in that we did get to know each other many years ago when I was still a dancer, just at the beginning of my journey of even thinking of becoming an artistic director. And there was a program, Dance East for Rural Retreats, where I was invited to attend as a potential director one day. And in fact, eventually they sponsored me to shadow Karen Kane in Canada. But in that first trip, Farouk was one of the speakers, and I found him incredibly inspirational, but also very different from all other speakers in the dance sector. I thought he had a completely different, new, innovative approach of the business of managing an arts organization, but also of what the place of an art organization in society should be. So I remember we just talked and talked and talked during that weekend, and we kept in touch. And of course, I knew Akram. In England, Akram is a giant. So I kept bumping into Farouk in shows of Akram's. And then eventually, when I was artistic director, I really wanted people in my team that could open doors that I didn't have access to, or that I didn't even think were available for the ballet or the dance world. And I also wanted to renew the way the company was being managed, both artistically, but also from an entrepreneurial point of view. And so I asked Farouk to join our team very early on.
I only echo what you say, Tamara. I remember meeting you, it was 2008 in January on this cultural leadership course. And it was your, this ferocious determination and vision you already had about the future of ballet that really, I mean, of all the people who were there to listen, you were the one who spoke loudest through your listening, if you know what I mean. And there was I really believed that you were going to do what you said. And that's a really, that's a very attractive quality as a producer to be. I look for people with these voices and this vision that I believe will happen. That's what happened when I first met Akram. I had the same feeling. And so when you invited me to actually initially to talk to your then board, your first board at ENB, it was just to give advice. And through that conversation, then I had this invitation from yourself, and I leapt at that because, for me, I can only go as far as the people I work with. And if I see the people I work with are going to go really far, wow, I want to join that. So, and there was a different energy. We were entering a company that had a bit of a dusty and a bit of a tired history at that point. And you really seriously wanted to shake it up and make it not just a brilliant ballet company, but a ballet company that was relevant to the modern world, that spoke of the world today, that, but also respected its history. So it was easy for me, easy. And I'm, it's one of the highlights of my career actually to have worked with you on Giselle.
Thank you. Same here.
Could you talk a little bit about this role that that Farouk took on, creative producer at ENB, and what was your vision for Tamara? What was your vision for bringing him in for that role? And Farouk, what did you hope to accomplish? Was this something new for ENB? You're sort of saying the idea was to shake things up. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
I mean, from my point of view, like I said, that I wanted to challenge the way that we had done things over the last many years as an organization. I think one of the issues I find with ballet particularly is the lack of research and development. There really is no time. We tend to put all in to every single production. There is also often very little cross-fertilization. And this might be controversial, but I don't believe any culture belongs to any particular group of people. I don't believe in the concept of cultural appropriation per se. I think culture is a constant cross-fertilization of people, and that the more you can bring in outside influences or other influences, diverse influences, the wealthier you become in knowledge and in diversity and in relevance. And so that was part of the reason to invite Farouk, because not only, as I said, he had all this knowledge and connection with the wider dance world in the UK, but also abroad in China, but also as a producer, he will challenge our own perception, my own perception of how you should do a new creation, for example, or where should you tour and how. So that was what I wanted. I wanted to be challenged personally and also institutionally.
Yeah. And actually, Bray, every job I do, I have to learn. I have to be in an experience where I think I'm going to learn something, and I think that's what Tamara offered. I mean, and to kind of amplify what she just said, there was a vision that was bigger than the company, bigger than the country, bigger than the ballet. It was about people. And I've always said throughout my career, if we spend our whole careers with people like ourselves, it's really hard to learn something new. And so joining Tamara, coming in, to be honest, I wasn't that familiar with the ballet. I always felt a little bit intimidated by it, because it felt like I'd worked with Akram, I'd worked in a more contemporary experimental approach to dance. But I felt that Tamara, it wasn't about defining, it was about creating a porous kind of culture where things could just cross-fertilize, as Tamara said, and in every single way, and to allow ourselves to discover new things about what we were capable of doing, but also who we are, and I think that so the role of creative producer really essentially is to ensure that I conjure up the circumstances where the artistic director or the choreographer makes their best work every time. That is my sole task, and to create a kind of ecosystem that supports that, and I'm very attracted to big, bold, visionary people and big, bold, visionary ideas. So it's easy for me, though, in saying that, I don't want to sound blasé, it's absolutely terrifying as well. When you take on history, you take on memory, you take on legacy, and you try to kind of recalibrate that. You have to be careful. Even when you take on Giselle, I suppose my biggest fear is Giselle, are we going to mess it up? Are we going to mess up this thing that people love so much? But there is something attractive about trying to go into something and turn it inside out and give it a new perspective and a new meaning.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I'm curious, did you feel like you were doing something revolutionary? You know, bringing Farouk in, taking on Giselle, one of the most classical ballets, and turning it on its head with a choreographer who really hasn't even choreographed much classical ballet in his career, if any. You know, did you feel like you were doing something that was shaking things up? Did you have resistance from the board and from the administrative team and, you know, inside your organization? Was it hard to break those rules?
It's a difficult question, really. I think I had an instinct that it was going to be, at worst, spoken about. You know, even if we made a mistake, even if the result was not what we all wanted it, even if it wasn't a ballet that we wanted to dance after the premiere, I thought, well, at least people will have an opportunity to question what we mean by tradition, what we mean by legacy, what we mean by ballet, what is contemporary. Is there a place for contemporary ballet? So at least that in itself, a conversation like that in our organization, among the artists of the organization, but also in the wider world of dance, was in itself for me a win. In the process of working with Akram, first in Dust, but obviously very much more in Giselle, where it was more of a collaboration, because I was bringing the knowledge of the classical Giselle and he was bringing the new. So in that moment, I did have an instinct that this was going to be worth it and that it was going to be important. But you never know until the audience responds, because you're so embedded in a production. And in all honesty, I think perhaps because of the journey we had already done from where I started as artistic director, the board was very supportive and my team was very supportive and the dancers were very open and incredibly creative and engaged in the process. The negatives came from most of it, from the most traditional parts of the ballet world, from people that were not involved in the process and didn't really know what we were trying to do. So it was either other directors or you know, other opinion makers and formers of the ballet world that thought we were being, I guess, disrespectful, and that we were not protecting the legacy and the traditions. And that I understand, you know, that ballet is a very fragile art form in how we pass the tradition, how we pass the knowledge, because it's word of mouth, really. It's Chinese whispers. We really don't know very much about the real original most of the times, but because it is so fragile, many people feel very protective about it. We don't have a huge legacy. It's not like theater or even classical music. So I understood where they were coming from. And so I didn't take offense. I thought they were doing it with their best of intentions.
And yeah, I mean, you know, the word instinct is what I really admire about Tomorrow. But the reason why you have such good instincts is is your knowledge of not what just happens with your company, but what happens outside in the outside world, in dance, in life, you know, in politics, in culture, in science. It's quite extraordinary. And I think that kind of mind refines an instinctive, you know, skill that, that people have. But you know, in answer to your question, Bray, about whether we're going to do revolutionary, absolutely not. And I think it's a dangerous way to think when you start something. I really do. I think you have to decide on who the best people are going to be, you know, and ensure that the process is optimized for all those people involved, and to create a set of rules around that particular context to ensure that you can actually, that through this, you will make something extraordinary. But I'm always very wary, and maybe that's something about myself, is that, you start thinking of the audience, you start thinking of the awards, you start thinking of changing history. Once you start with that, you're almost in a prison in your mind, in your imagination, and with the people you want to work with, because those are pressures you just don't need. There is enough pressure as it is when you begin. But I think the way that I thought it was quite revolutionary when Tamara and I were speaking about it was we had to change a lot of rules about the way a classical ballet works on a new piece of work. So for instance, when Akram was invited to do it, he asked that I would like to have a month of research with 10 dancers who are not maybe members of the company, just to begin to develop a language before I even joined the company. And then once he joined the company, then there was a request to Tamara that, you know what, 3 months only Giselle, nothing else. Not, Giselle after lunch and Sleeping Beauty at 4 o'clock and, and Ashton at 6, it had to only be Giselle for 3 months, which was, and that's a big rule breaking thing. And that's expensive. I mean, to get the company only doing one thing for that amount of time, and then to transfer that only doing Giselle to only 3 weeks, doing Giselle in a theater in production rehearsals before you even open. Now that's expensive, and that's a lot of rule breaking, but that was so necessary to immerse and to find a way into this story that made sense. It made sense to Akram, that made sense to Tamara, that made sense to the dancers and to the creative team. And we had a real difficulty because the composer was the one person who didn't embrace that mindset. So, a guy, and I won't name him, who was involved in he just decided he was going to write the music one way and he wasn't going to change it. And Akram was requesting a change, wasn't going to change it. So in the end, we just had to let him go. And Vincent Lamagna, who was then invited to work with Akram and the company, literally wrote the score in 3 weeks, day and night, and so, it did get stuck along the way. But, the thing I most admire was that, Tamara's ability to accept that rules need to be broken, or maybe that's the wrong way of saying it. Rules need to be created for every process. Every process demands its own set of rules. It's not like we will now take the rules of Giselle and use that for another work, because it's different people, it's different context, it's different budget. And so rules have to be created new for every single work.
And I think if I can follow up on what Farouk said, I will say, though, that process of creation, the way that we created Giselle, did inform how we create forward, though. We won't imitate it, but it certainly informed, for example, our new building. We moved to City Island over a year ago. And in the middle of City Island, there is what we call the Holloway Production Studio. It is really a full theater with the whole tower, because we really understood that it is unreasonable to invest a huge amount of money in a new production and do what traditionally will happen, which is give yourself 2 days in a theater to put it together. It is completely unacceptable when you are performing in London next to musicals that expect 6 months in production in a theater. It's the same audience, it's the same often price bracket, it's the same audience expectation. So we were kind of cutting ourselves as a industry short every time that we didn't give our product, our art, the time to grow in a theater, to really work on the production side of things. And so that's what informed that now in our new building, we have that capacity in-house. And even more importantly, to follow on this cross-fertilization, we're able to share it. So we have musical theater or opera or cinema productions or even advertising happening in the building. So we as artists can meet and collaborate and see the process of creation of different performing arts or different creative industries. So we would not, like I said, do the same again, because Akram is very particular in what his needs are, like consistency and also a very straight line, for example, which now that I'm creating Raimonda, I don't have the luxury to have that as artistic director. I didn't give myself that. But there are parts of it, but that really influence how we work as an organization, and the red lines that we put on the sand, for sure.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I think as a company, you're not just creating the ballet. I mean, you're producing it as well. And that interface between creation and producing is really necessary. That's, you know, the introduction of producers into ballet companies is relatively new, in fact. You know, even in any dance company, I think, you know, you find producers in music, and you find producers in theater and film, but it's a new concept that, you know, there is another layer of attention that needs to be taken care of in the creation of work. And that's a very good point, Tamara. You know, I think I've always felt it, you know, personally, I think it's such a terrible mistake to be in a studio like by 15 feet by 10 feet, and the dancer's already inhabiting this universe, and then within 2 days to be in a massive great big stage facing out to an audience and expected to transform their inner souls, their physical language in a way that can make sense so quickly. And it's often no surprise then why many premieres often feel a bit like, you know, undercooked, because they've not had time to kind of get out of that cooking pot onto the plate in a real way, you know. So I think it was a very smart move to have that production space in the building.
This reminds me of something you both told us in our prior conversations about the concept of audience as the final collaborator, and how you did your preview differently for this production. And maybe you can tell us all a little bit about that. We have a lot of ballet companies, a lot of directors, and they might be interested to hear about your experience with that and how that might continue on into other productions.
So yeah, we did this production in collaboration with Manchester International Festival. And so the last 2 weeks, we actually moved to Manchester, and we closed a theater for 2 weeks just for that last technical design aspect. But we started to invite audience, very often very young, some were dance related, dance students. And we involve them in the last 2 weeks of development of the ballet. And in fact, the ballet that started 2 weeks before and the ballet of the premiere were very, very different. There was a lot of change. And a lot of it was simply asking the questions to this audience at the end of each run. What do you think about it? What do you like? What did you understand? What parts of it didn't make sense? And just hearing the feedback and responding to that feedback. I would say that doesn't mean doing pieces of art or ballet tailored to please the audience. I think there is a difference between trying to please the audience that is a little bit like what Farouk was saying before, trying to please the critics or trying to win an award. I think that's a very dangerous road to take. But involving the audience to question what you take after so long for granted, what you think is probably understood, but actually perhaps is not completely finished, and some relationships and how characters come across. That was a very important part of this process, and one that I will try to include in new productions in the future as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you know, and I think we often see the audience as a consumer, but they're not. You know, they are part of that ecosystem of creation. They are the ones, like Tamara says, they help us finish the work. And so therefore, anyone who's involved in almost finishing, I almost see them as they are a collaborator in some sense. And again, they're not, you know, having them in your mind at the beginning is not a great place to be, because then you're not, you know, there are already so many voices in your head when one creates. And I see that when people start to collaborate, you know, so building a circle of trust in which one can take enormous risks and venture into new territory without, you know, a multitude of voices in your ear is got to be is the safe space. But then recognizing that at some point you've got to pull away from the work because you've become so invested in it, and it's been right up against your nose for like 3 or 4 months and once the audience goes in the room, you actually have to step back and give them that space between you and the work, and it offers an alternative perspective. So I like to personally see them as the collaborator that finishes the work. And as we know, not audiences are all the same. You know, one night to the next, it's a different energy comes in the room, a different energy slightly on stage, you know, and then you almost, and that's the beauty of dance, you're almost making the work every day. you know, even when it's finished. So it goes on and on. And I think there's a very, if we talked about the audiences in that way, maybe there would get more of them coming, because they would think, oh, I'm also the creative collaborator in this, rather than someone who just spends an X number of dollars and has a nice evening.
We have a question here in the chat that I'm going to ask you both. So this question says, 3 months devoted to one production seems unsustainable with the demands of a home season and touring, in addition to financial implications. How are you thinking about the Giselle commissioning framework as it relates to other productions? You say you didn't give yourself the same framework for Raimonda. Why not?
Partly, well, 3 months, in all honesty, I think to do a big production, a full length ballet, I think 3 months is very reasonable. I think I understand we have so much pressure now to create, and sometimes I think, at least in Giselle, that year was the only new production. And that was a choice I made, that our resources will be concentrated in this production because it was important that he had the time that he needed, that he had the resources that he needed. And in fact, it has returned the investment tenfold. So I think that that is a priority that as a director, you can only judge. And it is also based in your pattern of work. We are a touring company, which means that we concentrate a lot of performances very close together. So we don't have our own theater. So for example, right now we should be doing Nutcracker. Usually we have a season of 6 weeks with often 12 shows per day. Sorry, 12 shows per week during those 6 weeks. So we dance a lot and we tour, but we concentrate those periods of performances to be able to then release periods of creation. I think if you're in an opera house, for example, you have different demands. So I think you have to find your own patterns of creation. But good things take time. There is really very, very few occasions where you can do something really quickly that has some depth and meaning. And all the works that I know and I admire, most of them have taken time. And in the case of Raimonda, I couldn't do that partly because of COVID. That changed everything. But I still have 10 weeks still. So in fact, it is a spread in 2 seasons, but at the end, I will have a total of 13 weeks to create Raimonda. And, you know, so, and I don't think that is unreasonable when you're trying to do one of these pieces that are huge investment of resources and time. But as I say, each organization has to make those decisions.
Mm-hmm. Farouk, I'm wondering if you have any perspective on that from your partnership with Akram Khan. I mean, he's continually creating new works and, you know, is incredibly creative and groundbreaking in his own way. So I'm curious about how that process works with the Akram Khan company. Do you have anything to add?
Well, I have to find the money for every production. That's my job. You know, my job is to know. Akram spends 3-4 months. Actually, the whole gestation of many of our projects are usually about 18 months. You know, from conception to delivery on stage. You know, just discussing it. You know, series of workshops, collaborative discussions. Usually around 3 to 4 months in the studio, and you know, with some workshops prior. Workshops prior to this. So, you know, my job is to make sure that he has that. You know, I mean, look, when I first met Akram back in 2000, you know, and we were both, I just finished my master's degree and I wasn't, you know, I hadn't done a thing. I was completely naive and fearless. And Akram was a young choreographer, 23 years old with a dream, you know, and he said he wanted to create something that, you know, that sounded impossible for a young artist, which was 12 weeks of rehearsal, you know, original lighting, original costume. I went home and sold my flat to pay for that production. So as a producer, I had to take risks as well if I really believe in the vision of the artists I work with. And so I'm all for it. You know, the more time an artist or artistic director or choreographer can investigate the work, the better. And it's also good for the dancers because it doesn't become just a doing process. It's a being process where they begin to inhabit their characters with more depth and more understanding. And that comes from having more time rather than, having a few shows or touring it for a year till they really begin to grasp what it means to them. So, and I think we have to be careful that, in all industries, that we're not just transactional. We're not, we're not just churning things out for the sake of a market. We are there to educate ourselves, to educate others, to learn, to challenge, to destroy. In fact, I mean, I joked with Akram recently. I don't call him a creator. I call him a destroyer, because that's what you're doing. You're taking loads of ideas and you're throwing more than 3/4 of them away to find the essence of what you really want to say. So, and destroying is more expensive than creating.
And I completely agree with Akram in how it changes the process for the dancers too. I think a lot of the process of creation, both in Creature and also now in Raimonda, has been just conversational before we even start making a step. And I think that is incredibly important in engaging the dancers intellectually in the creation, not just physically. So not coming into the studio with your own ideas as a creator, said, do this, do that, but actually saying, this is the story I'm trying to tell. These are the characters. This is the world in which they lived. This is the journey. Let's explore it together. And it's so much more rewarding, I think, for a creator to have that experience, but also for the dancers, they own the work, not just physically, but actually emotionally, intellectually. And it's always better. It's always better when you include as many people as possible, because they go away, they research themselves, they come back with ideas, with inspirations, with things they've seen that fits into this pot. And obviously at the end, you as choreographer or director do the instruction parts, you have this huge circle or pot of things happening. And then you have to say, what does this piece actually really need? And I think that's one of the skills that Akram is, in my opinion, the best in the world. He's ruthless with his own choreography. He will say, this is not what the piece needs. And some bits, I was in Giselle, I was heartbroken. I was like, but that's my favorite bit. Like, that is so beautiful. Can we just skip it because it's beautiful? And he'll be like, no, but it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't work for the story. It's going. I was like, but I think that's part of what he's so brilliant at telling stories, because he knows that the story is king. And so, that there is nothing for the ego really at the end of the day. And I think that, but to get there, you do first have to have all this conversation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, just to add to that, Bray, to what Tamara just said, I mean, that demonstrates the leadership of today. The leadership of today is no longer about command and control. It's about learning and co-create with the people you work with. And that's what's exciting for all industries, actually. And I think that's also why I don't do a little kind of Tamara cheerleading moment, but I think that is a demonstration of really forward-thinking, innovative leadership. You won't have innovative projects if you don't have innovative leadership first. And they're part of the continuum that you have to do to make change and to create new things.
So my next question I'm going to acknowledge is a very difficult one, but I'm going to ask it of you both anyway. Okay. So we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Arts leaders are facing a crisis that they've never faced in their careers before, and I'm sure hope will never face again. And we're here telling them that, they should be innovative and look what happened when ENB took on this risk and they had great success. What lessons can they learn from what you all have done that they can take right now to help, make their organizations emerge successfully stronger after the pandemic?
I think, I'm, first of all, I would say I am nobody to give advice. Like, I'm at the very beginning of my journey as artistic director. What I have done, the way that I have coped, but obviously, like I said, this is in the context of Britain, where we have received some subsidy rescue package. So again, very particular to the possibilities that I have to work with that are very different in the United States and different in Germany. What I have done is precisely the same thing that we are saying. I've imagined a different kind of ballet. Since the moment it was clear that we couldn't perform live, I wanted to use, like many other people, the platform of digital, what digital could bring. And I think the main reason for that is because from March, when we went into lockdown, I started teaching ballet classes every day from my kitchen. And, 10 weeks later, we have 4 million people that had joined in to do ballet class. So we had an audience. We had an audience we can speak to directly. And so I thought, okay, so what is this audience in need, or what kind of experience do they want? Do they want to sit at home for 3 hours watching a recorded archive? And some of them did. But if we're going to create something now, what is that? And so I thought, well, let's not just film a ballet. Let's not commission a ballet that then we're going to film. Let's commission a dance film. And so let's partner the film directors and choreographers and be very clear, and that's not easy. There is no king in this project. It won't be a ballet that is filmed. For once, let's say the filming is not devoted for the choreography, but it has to be a collaboration. It has to be seen from the beginning as a film. And yes, it's not easy sometimes. And some people think that they can agree to that. And then when it comes to it, really suffer, giving away control of their choreography is their baby. But what we created was a whole new digital season and a digital platform that was very different, that was innovative, even at this time that was so difficult and we had so few resources. So that was my strategy, to do something that was of this time and that reflected what was needed now. Is that the lesson for everybody? Obviously not. But as I say, it's all about the context and knowing who are you speaking to? And for the first time as a touring company, most of the time we depend on venues to speak to our audience. They own the data. For the first time, we could speak directly to them. So it was a new situation that certainly has changed how we see the future. Even now, Creature, which was about to open physically in a theater before we went to the lockdown, is now 2 pieces of art. We still have Creature, which will be a live performance, but we're now starting to commission a film, which won't be a filming of the performance. It will be something parallel, similar, but not the same. And I think that has changed in terms of how we see digital through the pandemic.
My answer to your question is, I think it's been, this has not been an easy year. We all know that. I don't have to tell anybody that. But it's been, we don't get often, in our lives, an opportunity to reflect, and reflection is just an essential part of creation, of being creative. We have to reflect on ourselves and give us an opportunity to stop, and we've all had to stop and recalibrate and rethink our values, what we want, work out the difference between what we need and what we want, because sometimes, often they're not the same things. And when we're busy, we often get caught up with what we want. But I think the biggest challenge and the most exciting challenge of what's happened for, cultural organizations is to find that, there's a critical mass of creative energy now, and not to be frightened of unleashing it. Because right now, everyone's struggling with their budgets and their finances, and they're thinking, what can I do to protect what we had and to kind of restore it to some kind of sense of stability and security? I think we have to, personally, and we're doing that already at Akram Khan, thinking about how, again, this thing that has kind of caused us damage and trauma and stagnated us can be seen as a tool to reinvent ourselves. And there's never a better moment to reinvent ourselves when we're almost like the whole thing has been taken apart, because you can just rebuild out of an ashes of something rather than take down a complete building and rebuild it up again. So I think this is a massive opportunity to think differently, to reimagine ourselves, to realign our values, and also think about what are those things we've always wanted to do, but we've never really done. What have we, when we've dreamt about them at night, but in the morning we've forgotten to do something about it, that kind of stuff, which we all have. And I think ballet directors, cultural organizations, just do it. Take this opportunity and reimagine this thing and think about what kind of new energy we can bring into the world and how we can self-reflect in the ways that we haven't done before. And that keeps me really optimistic and positive about the future.
Brooke, you've convinced me. I'm ready to do it. I'm ready to go for it. We have time for one more question, I think, here from the chat, if you all don't mind. So this question is, what are some of the things you are doing to harness the excitement, attention, and breadth of reach garnered by the production of Giselle to build loyalty with new audiences and support future innovation within the company?
Oh, what are things we're doing? That's, such a big question. I mean, I guess the things we are doing, which are counterintuitive, is not to imitate Giselle, not to try to do Giselle again, which will be the first instinct. Oh, this one worked really well. Let's do the same kind of, let's do Akram's Swan Lake, and then let's do Akram's Sleeping Beauty. But that's the one thing both Akram and I agreed. It was not what we wanted to do. So what we're doing is rethinking after Giselle what makes sense for us as an organization. And of course, his Creative Creature, which hopefully we will open in September. And for me personally, it was also time to put this, how can I say, this ethos of what is ballet today, or these questions that we asked throughout the process of Giselle. What is ballet today? What is the place of tradition? But in a ballet context, which is why I decided to do Raimonda, because it was kind of, is in a way I was saying, okay, so we've asked those questions in the context of a collaboration with contemporary dance. What is then the role of classical ballet language? Is there still a role to tell stories that are relevant or that are meaningful? Or should we say, when we do ballet, it can only be done in a certain way, and then when you do something new, then you bring in contemporary concepts to the process. So I get that's what we're trying to do, is trying to continue to challenge that audience that hopefully has trust on us, but not, I would say, not patronize them, not say, since you like this, let us show you that. So it's still about taking risks. And I know it sounds very flippant. They're not uncalculated risks. They are not delusional risks. They are risk-taking within the context of collaboration with brilliant people, with very experienced teams. The risks have to also be considered. But in this case, the next step to continue to value that trust and that following that the audience has bring us to with Giselle is to say, well, this is our new proposition, and humbly, I hope you like it, but it has nothing to do with Giselle. and I think that's the only option we have.
That's so beautiful, Tamara. It made me just think that, the key currency of trust is that someone allows you not to imitate yourself again. You know what I mean? That thing that, you just said. And I remember that when I was performing as a dancer, that thing where you've had a really great show and you try to recreate yourself the next day. And that is the worst thing you can do to yourself, because you're no longer being yourself. You're being a version, like a facade of oneself. And I think that is, again, a bit of advice for any organization that wants to grow, is that if things work, don't copy them this again, but just transfer the mindset that created that thing in the first place. That mindsets can be carried forward, but not the productions themselves. So it's, let's try not to keep imitating ourselves. And like Tamara says, not to patronize the audience, because they do know when you're faking it. I think they do know.
Yeah, definitely. And I agree with you. I stopped dancing some roles the moment I was on the stage, and I caught myself imitating myself, and I went, "Oh, this is okay. So I have to move on from this role, or at least stop doing it for a long time." And I guess, and also another bit of like the way I make decisions. Very often I just commission what I want to see, just plainly and simply. I am a complete theater gig. I try to go to the theater 2 or 3 times a week in London, which is very easy. I love going to see things. And often then that influences what would I like to see in a ballet. And that's sometimes as simple as that. I just commission what I want to see. So it's not like I have some amazing visionary glass ball. Sometimes it's as simple as, what is it that I can't find right now that as an audience member I'm missing? And I think that will be a really good question right now, because we've all been at home for so long. You know, perhaps that is what we need to ask ourselves. So if I'm going to see another piece of digital content, what exactly do I want to see? And what is the first thing I want to see when I get out into the theater again? Perhaps that's just the beginning of the conversation.
That's really great.
Well, I'm so sorry to say that we are out of time. I think I could stay with you all much longer. Thank you so much for your inspiring words and talking to us about your really exciting and innovative and successful partnership. And I'm sure that it will continue on as you all continue on your journeys and your creative careers. I'm going to turn it back to Chris for just a minute to wrap us up.
Thank you, Bray, and thank you to both of you. Just a couple of words of closing here. First of all, I think you're 2 of the most quotable guests we've had on our 22 webinars across this year. Really extraordinary moments of brilliance and insight there. For all of you who are interested, you will receive directly in the next few days a newsletter with a link to the recording of this session if you would like to send it around, watch it again, and look for all those quotable moments. It's available to all of you and to anybody else you want. I would also like to point out that we have our first webinar of next year will actually be on January 19 on the topic not dissimilar to this one, because we are going to be continuing to talk about collaboration. We're going to talk about a very interesting work that the Joffrey Ballet and the Lyric Opera of Chicago are doing to work more closely together. And this will be kind of a first look at this truly fascinating partnership that the 2 organizations are forming. So I look forward to seeing you hopefully on January 19 in the new year. In closing, you've been inspiring Tamara, Farouk, for years, obviously, but this morning, today, you've been inspiring to all of us on this webinar. And it's important to have inspiration in this very difficult time for everyone in the world of the arts and everyone in the world in general. So we really appreciate you sharing your story, sharing the extraordinary passion that you put into this collaboration, and helping us think through some of the lessons that you know we all could take a lot away from. So with that, I thank you so much. Happy holidays to everybody and Happy New Year. And we look forward to seeing you again very soon. Tamara, Farouk, again, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Have a great festive break, everybody.
Yes.